I'm Teisha Bader with Shalom TV's news update for Wednesday, June the 12th, 2013. Ynet reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu once again called on the Palestinians to return to peace talks without preconditions. The Prime Minister made the remarks at a press conference in Poland today, where he met with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Netanyahu urged an immediate return to the negotiating table and said his aim is to reach a compromise in which a demilitarized Palestinian state, which recognizes Israel as a Jewish state, is established. Earlier today, Netanyahu had distanced himself from a portion of a statement released yesterday by his office that said that both sides, the Palestinians and Israelis, have to refrain from any unilateral steps, saying those are not helpful for achieving peace. Both Israel's Army Radio and Channel 10 reported this morning that the Prime Minister took issue with the language of the text, as it could imply an endorsement on the part of Israel to a construction freeze in the settlements. The text was said to be part of a joint statement that the Israeli Prime Minister was supposed to sign today together with the Polish Prime Minister regarding a return to peace talks. Netanyahu's aides have now said that the Prime Minister either didn't approve the text or didn't see it before it was sent out yesterday, blaming the National Security Council. As you may have seen on IBA News, Netanyahu arrived in Poland today with a delegation of 5 ministers to meet with Tusk as part of a 2-day trip, which also includes a visit to the former Auschwitz Nazi death camp and participation in the reopening of an exhibition at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum tomorrow. Israel's Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon is scheduled to fly to Washington tomorrow morning for a meeting with U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel. The visit is said to be a follow-up to Hagel's trip to Israel in April. The Israeli Defense Minister is also set to meet with leaders of Washington's Jewish community, U.S. lawmakers, and senior AIPAC officials. The Palestinian assailant who is accused of stabbing Israeli settler Evyatar Borovsky to death in late April was indicted today by the Samaria IDF court in the West Bank. Salam Zagal reportedly murdered Borovsky in order to, quote, return honor to his family, after his brother was jailed by the Palestinian Authority for allegedly collaborating with Israel. Meanwhile, Palestinian news agency Ma'an reported that Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas would not fire or reprimand a PA official who had praised Zagal for Borovsky's murder. Sultan Abu al-Ainain, a leader in the Fatah movement, had called Zagal a heroic fighter after the murder, prompting several members of U.S. Congress to call on Abbas to dismiss him. Ma'an reported that al-Ainain's office director responded to that request, saying that, quote, it would have been more appropriate for the Congress to document settler attacks on the Palestinian people, schools, and mosques in the West Bank. The letter from the members of Congress to Abbas was sent last month and signed by House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Ed Royce, as well as Representative Elliot Engel, and Subcommittee Chairs Ted Deutsch, Nita Lowey, and Brad Sherman. Reuters reports that United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said that escalating violence in the Golan Heights is jeopardizing the 4-decade-old ceasefire between Israel and Syria. In a report to the UN Security Council yesterday, Ban recommended enhancing the self-defense capabilities of the UN peacekeeping mission in the area and adding to the amount of troops there that had stood at 1,000 to about 1,250. The report came after Austria began removing its troops from the peacekeeping force yesterday. Austria's troops made up the largest contingent of the force, about 380 soldiers. Russia had offered to replace those forces, but the UN said the agreement with Israel and Syria doesn't allow permanent members of the UN Security Council to take part in the peacekeeping force. The American Jewish Committee today praised Prime Minister Netanyahu for rejecting statements made last week by Deputy Defense Minister Dani Danon. Danon had said in an interview with the Times of Israel last Thursday that a majority of the coalition government in Israel would oppose a Palestinian state. After Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon reportedly asked Netanyahu to reprimand Danon for the comments, the Prime Minister's office said that Danon's remarks, quote, do not represent the position of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the government of Israel, unquote. AJC Executive Director David Harris commended Netanyahu for his response, saying the end game for peace, as difficult and complex as it may be to reach, must be two states, Israel and Palestine, for two peoples. Further saying Prime Minister Netanyahu, like his three predecessors, is committed to achieving that goal through direct negotiations with the Palestinian Authority and with the assistance of U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. And that's Shalom TV's news update for Wednesday, June the 12th, 2013. I'm Teisha Bader.